Welcome to Humble Pie. We're continuing our series in Genesis chapters 1 to 3, looking at chapter 3 today. We've been learning about this one God who's the creator of all things. And he speaks. And when he speaks, order comes in the chaos. And when he speaks, goodness comes. And in chapter 2, we see a vision of the world and human beings as originally intended. We get a picture of paradise, of the world without blemish, without imperfections, without darkness. And we see a place of abundance, a place where all creatures can thrive and where there is no pain. And so we have to ask, so what happened? And this is where Genesis 3 comes in. Genesis 3 is so important to not only the rest of the Bible, but giving us a framework for how we see our world. And when we're asking the questions of how did the world come to be today? Why is there suffering? And why is there so much pain? And why is there so much darkness? And I call chapter 3 the story that explains everything, or the story that makes sense of all other stories. And it's going to be presenting to us human beings, the men and women, a story of what happens when they listen to another voice or other voices rather than the voice of their creator. So I'm just going to go ahead and read, and I'll expound on it as we're going into the verses. Okay, we're going to go from verses 1 to 13. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "Well, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." So what I'd like for us to do is just do a little compare and contrast of what God actually said in Genesis 2 to human beings and what the serpent and what the woman is saying that God said. So in chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, it says that the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden." You notice God's heart is generosity. But there's one tree that you must not eat from, of the knowledge of good and evil. Because why? He actually explains the why. When you eat from it, you will certainly die. So God's basically saying, be careful of this one tree. You can eat, you can play with every other part of this garden, but just this one, be careful that you don't. Now look at what the serpent says. The serpent says in chapter 3, verse 1, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" Now notice he omits, he does not talk about the generosity of God. He's basically presenting God as a person that's trying to prohibit or trying to keep human beings from something. And then look what the woman says back to the serpent. "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden." So notice the woman is also, in her mind, there's some deception that's going on. She's also emphasizing the lack that she feels like God is trying to keep from her, not the generosity or the goodness of God. And then you see her adding something that God actually didn't even say. She says in verse 2, "You must not touch it or you will die." See, that was not part of God's words. And then we see the serpent escalating his blatant lies about what God said. "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman. "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Isn't this how deception works? You start off just with a little bit of subtlety and it's not as blatant, but then eventually the truth comes out. It becomes very blatant, right? Now verse 6, "When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for getting wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it." Now, the important part in these verses here in verse 6 is that the husband was there with her and ate with her. So we can't just blame the woman, because if you look at the end of chapter 2, the original design between men and women and husbands and wives, where they were supposed to work together as a team to be fruitful and multiply, and to actually be steward of what God had given them, to take care of the things that God had given them together. If you look at chapter 2, verse 23, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. And so they worked together. They were meant to collaborate together. Just like God collaborated with Adam to name all the animals, so also men and women were supposed to work together as a team and protect one another, to be fruitful and multiply. Then the eyes of both of them were open, verse 7, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Do you notice, because they disobeyed God, there is a dysfunction in their relationship. There's a damage that happens to their relationship with God. And remember in chapter 2 we talked about how human beings, they were created, the original design was to be in relationship with God and to be covered by God. And their confidence and their identity came from their relationship with their Creator. Well, now this is the beginning of the severing, of the damage, of the separation. So instead of being covered by the relationship that they had with God, they started to look for other ways to cover themselves. Verse 8, then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, where are you? He answered, I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Again, a severing of the relationship with God. They hid from God. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? The man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. So notice this is also the beginning of blaming others for decisions that they made themselves. The man says, the woman you put here with me. So instead of taking responsibility for his decision and his own deception, he blames the woman. She gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. And the woman, instead of taking responsibility for her own decision and her own deception, she says, the serpent deceived me and I ate. And so she blames the serpent. So this story is teaching us a lot here. That it's, yes, the environment is corrupt and the environment is bad, but also their own human beings' decision making and the deception that happens in our own minds is also part of the reason why the world is the way it is today. Now, usually when you read this, the tendency is to say, oh, this is something that happened a long time ago and has nothing to do with us today. And we can also maybe even blame, oh, this is what Adam and Eve did. It was a long time ago and I wasn't there. I'm not the one that made this bad decision. Well, this is not the way that the Israelites would read Genesis chapter 3. When the Israelites would read chapter 3, they saw this story as a story that not only made sense of everything, but the story that they experienced on a daily basis. Basically, that everyone is born into a world where there's competing voices. And every day we're listening to voices in ourselves, voices from others, or even our family, voices from television. And we have a choice to listen to the voice of the Creator, which always brings goodness and life and is true, or we have a choice to listen to other voices that may bring harm to ourselves and the people that we love. So they would say, this is my story every day. I can actually relate with this every day. And every day I want the words of my Creator rather than the words or voice or listen to the voices of anyone else. And just a few questions for you to consider. What kind of outright lies have you experienced in your life? Have you ever been deceived in this way? How do you figure out what is truth and what is a lie? And often it's a mixture, isn't it? Sometimes it's not fully truth, just like we saw in the way the serpent was talking and even the woman was talking. But how do we figure out what is the truth when sometimes it's a mixture? What voices do you listen to, and how have they helped you or hurt you in your life? So Genesis 3 is a story that makes sense of everything. And next time we're going to look at the consequences of what happens and an elaboration of death when death enters into this world, the rest of chapter 3. But for today, it's trying to present to us that every day we need to discern the difference between something that is good for us and something that may not be good for us. And it's presenting to us the need for our Creator to be the one that we listen to, that we listen to His voice rather than other voices. Just remember, God's words always lead to goodness. All other voices can be a mixture. How will you filter out what is true and good for us and what may not be? I hope you were blessed by Genesis chapter 3. May we overcome the false voices in our lives. Thanks for watching, everyone. We're Humble Pie. Hope to see you again.